Hi everyone, and welcome to part 3 of our How to Build a Computer tutorial here on Newegg TV. My name is Paul, and if you watched part 2, you saw me put two computers together. So before we get started with installing an operating system, let's take a quick look at the finished product hardware-wise of both of these computers. So first off, here on the left is our Build A in the Corsair case, which you guys already saw the detailed build on, but there is a look at the final product with all the wiring completed. And here on the right, you can see Build B in the Cooler Master case. A couple things to mention here. We have just a single 2.5-inch drive that is right down here in this cage at the bottom. So these drive bays over here are actually pretty empty, but that did give me a place to tuck away a good amount of the cables from our non-modular power supply. So you can see a bit more of the cabling, but the key thing here is that the main compartment of the case itself is nice and open, so the airflow can still go from front to back and exhaust at the top. That's about all we're going to show you guys on the hardware side today, except for maybe one or two things. Today's video is about software, and more specifically about an operating system. You need to install an operating system onto your computer in order to make use of it. And really there's about 3 major operating systems that are out there on the market today, apart from the up-and-coming mobile ones like Android. You have the Apple operating system, and it is possible to make a home-built computer and install the Apple operating system onto it, but we're not going to really talk about that today. There's Linux, and much love to all you Linux users out there. If you're looking for an inexpensive operating system to get your computer up and running, especially if you're running something like a server, Linux is the way to go. Now today we're actually going to be talking about and guiding you through the installation of Windows, and specifically Windows 7. For all you Linux users who are just like, yay, he talked about Linux, but now boo, he's installing Windows. Well, Windows is really it has the lion's share of the market right now. Most people, home users, are going to be running Windows, and these systems behind us are gaming systems. They have gaming video cards in it, and Windows is really the cream of the crop as far as gaming operating systems. So we're going to be installing Windows 7, and then we're going to be showing you how to configure your operating system, do things like install the drivers, so that you can make use of your computer happily and do things like browsing the internet and running all the fun programs that you can install onto the computer. Now, if you're going to be loading Windows, there's a couple things you might want to decide. First of all, which version should I get? There's Home, Pro, and Ultimate, and most people, Home is the way to go. That's going to handle all of your needs. The second thing you might be concerned about is you will see that there are 32-bit versions and 64-bit versions available. Now, if you get the full retail box version, like you see right here, you will get both 32-bit and 64-bit, and you can choose which one to install. If you go with OEM, you will need to choose 32 or 64-bit. And for most people right now, you should choose 64-bit. 32-bit has some memory limitations. Essentially, if you load 32-bit operating system with Windows 7 and you have 4 gigs of memory installed, you're only going to be able to make use of about 3.5 gigs of that memory, 3.2 to 3.5, depending on your hardware configuration. Now there's a technical reason for that, which I'm not going to explain right here because it would be far too complicated. But basically, if you're getting a new computer right now, install 64-bit Windows unless you know that there's a specific application that you really need that's only 32-bit compatible. Even in that situation, 64-bit Windows can emulate 32-bit Windows, and for most applications, you can still run it. So apart from your shiny, fresh copy of Windows 7, you're going to want to do a couple quick prep items before we do our first boot. Of course, you will want to connect your peripherals. We have a monitor, a keyboard, and a mouse. The monitor and computer both have power plugged in, and all these peripherals are plugged into the ports on the back. Now, Build B here only has 1 drive to install to, but Build A, we actually have 2 drives. We have that SSD, and we have the mechanical hard drive. So one quick thing to do before we load Windows is I'm actually going to unplug the mechanical hard drive. I'm going to leave the SSD plugged in. That's to make sure that Windows puts everything on that SSD, and then we'll plug in the mechanical once we're done installing. You can unplug the data or the power, doesn't matter which one, just unplug it, leave it there, and we'll plug it back in after Windows is installed. Finally, you want to make sure that you have your motherboard's driver installation CD handy, particularly if you don't have an internet connection. I'm going to be assuming that most of you have an internet connection available, but you will want to have this on hand just in case. Now, one final thing that you can do, apart from having that disk on hand, is you can actually go to the manufacturer's website for the hardware on your computer, and you can download the latest and greatest drivers. You'll want to do that anyway, but if you can do it beforehand, it can smooth the process later on. Download them, copy them to something like a thumb drive, or you can burn them to a CD or DVD. So for installing Windows 7 today, we have 2 retail box versions of Windows 7, and since this is the higher end computer, we've gone ahead and chosen Windows 7 Ultimate Retail. For this one over here, and the version that will work for most of you folks at home, we have Windows 7 Home Premium. Now the nice thing about these Windows 7 packages is that they come with 2 disks inside. It has both 32-bit and 64-bit versions of Windows. As mentioned, it's best to go with 64-bit right now for forward compatibility and to make sure that you can make use of all of your memory, but it's nice to have both of those options available to you. Also make sure to hang on to this plastic casing because there's a very important piece of information on the inside. Apart from your booklets and information here, you have a product key. And yes, I've put tape over it because none of you are going to be stealing my product key. So now that our Windows 7 installation disk is in the optical drive, we need to tell the computer to boot from that optical drive. Now there's a few different ways to do this. It will depend on the motherboard that you have installed. But basically, when you first power on the computer, the BIOS, or basic input-output system, is going to go and start recognizing all the hardware that you have installed. That's called POST, or Power On Self-Test. Now, you might need to be really quick, but you're going to see some information splashed down here at the bottom. Right there. Did you see it? It was really quick. That told us to press delete to enter the EFI or the BIOS. And again, there's a difference between EFI and BIOS. I'll come back to that. But once you hit delete, when it tells you to, it should pop into that, and there you'll be able to assign which drive or you want the computer to boot from. And once you've hit the delete key, or whichever key the BIOS prompts you to hit in order to enter the BIOS settings, you will see the BIOS. It will pop up. And in this case, since we have a newer motherboard, this is actually an EFI BIOS. EFI is a little bit more advanced. It's newer. It will let you do things such as boot from hard drives that are larger than 2.2 terabytes. But one of the great things is you actually have mouse and keyboard support, so I can use the mouse to zoom around here and do different things. And fortunately, boot priority is, since it's one of the main things that you'll be accessing the BIOS for, is right down here at the bottom, and it's also drag and drop. So as I mouse over these, I can see this one is our HP Blu-ray disc combo drive. This next one here is our Plextor SSD, which is what we're going to be loading onto. I want it to boot from this drive. Fortunately, it's already in the #1 position, so we're good to go. I just need to hit exit, save and changes, and reset. The system will reboot, and now when it boots, it should access that Blu-ray drive and boot off of the disk that is installed. So now you can see Windows is loading files. Obviously, since there's no other Windows on here except for that disk that we've installed, we know that this is successfully booting off of that Blu-ray drive. Blu-ray drives are significantly slower than, say, a hard drive or an SSD. So it'll take a few minutes to load up the files, and then it will start to guide you through the Windows installation process. But we have a couple other demos to show you because not all computers have EFI, like this one here, and we also wanted to show you a different example of EFI implementations as well as BIOS. So next we're going to boot up our Gigabyte motherboard based system over here just to show you guys a slight difference between the two. But really you're going after the same thing. You want to get into the BIOS and you want to, there it is, and you want to set up the boot devices. Now right there it quickly said that we want to hit delete to enter the BIOS. So I'm going to reset, even though it's already doing what I want it to do and loading Windows, and I'm going to be spamming delete as it boots up to get into the Gigabyte BIOS. Now both of these motherboards have what is called EFI, which is a new version of BIOS. As mentioned, you can do things like booting from a 2 terabyte hard drive and that sort of thing. But one of the benefits of being able to access this stuff, you can see down there it says F12 would give you a boot menu. So if you don't want to go into the BIOS and actually make these setting changes, some motherboards will allow you to get a quick boot menu that will allow you to do that without having to go in and mess with any of these settings. And just keep hitting it, and then you can see this is a more standard type BIOS that you may have recognized from days past. But in a typical BIOS setting, if you don't have EFI, you can go down here, you can find usually it's in advanced BIOS features. We can see hard disk boot priority. And basically, if you go in there, it will list your hard drives, and you can choose which one you want to boot from. We want to boot from the, as far as hard drives go, we want to boot from our Seagate Momentus XT. If I go back, we can see the first boot device, second boot device, and third boot device. Now right now it's set to hard drive, but what it's going to do is it's going to look at the hard drive and it's going to say there's no operating system there, so it's going to move on to the next device, CD-ROM. So in this case, if I reset, it's just going to automatically boot from the CD-ROM, and that's nice and convenient. But if you really need to change those settings, if you can't get it to boot off of the optical drive, you can go in here into your standard BIOS, you can tell it exactly where to boot from, you can remove everything else, and basically then you reset and it should boot from the proper location. So now that both machines are set to boot from their optical drives, I have Windows 7 Ultimate in this one and Windows 7 Home in this one. I'm going to boot them both up and we'll start loading Windows. Now that we've booted off the DVD, it's just going to run through the quick first steps. You will choose your language, choose your time, choose your keyboard input method, hit next. Next up, we want to hit install now. Also bear in mind is repair your computer features down here. If you choose to boot off of the disk in the future, you can use those functions to do some repair features. Next up, we want to agree to Microsoft's terms and conditions. You will definitely want to read all of this information, hit accept, and hit next. Next, you're faced with the decision of whether to do an upgrade or a custom installation. We want to choose custom because that will allow us to install a fresh, complete new copy of Windows. And finally here, we will see our installed hard drive. We have our Seagate Momentus XT in this. It's a 500 gig hard drive, 465 gigs formatted. And if you are not seeing your disk here, you definitely want to check all your connections inside. But what we're going to do is hit Drive Options Advanced. You can format the drive here if it's a previously used drive. You can create a new partition if you want as well. We need to create a new partition because the drive has to be partitioned, and what you'll want to do is just use the maximum partition. You can partition a hard drive, which will split it up into different segments, and it will be recognized as two different drives in your machine. That's a little bit more advanced. It's an option for those of you who are interested in it. But for most users, you'll want to take your hard drive, use the maximum size possible, which is the default right here, and you'll want to hit apply. That will create a new partition. As mentioned when I unplugged the drive before, it will also create a little system reserved partition, 100 megs. Don't worry about that, it is automatic. But once that is created, you can hit next, and it will begin to copy Windows files. You can take a break for now because this will take a few minutes to expand the Windows files, go through some installation features. We're going to run through the same set of steps over here with our second computer. We're going to hit install. If you're wondering why there is a black band around the outside of the screen, that's because I've plugged in the HDMI cable to this monitor. HDMI has some overscan and underscan features that set up automatically because it's made frequently to be used with high definition televisions. Don't worry about that. Once we actually get into Windows and install our graphics drivers, we can actually set that up so it will fill the entire screen. Here we have our SSD, Plex Store, 120 gigs, it's primary partition. Again, we're going to format the drive. Well, we don't really need to, it's already got a partition. But just in case, let's say you're reusing a drive, you can delete the existing partition. That will remove any information, so definitely want to make sure that you've backed up everything. If you are reusing a drive, hit new. Again, we're going to use the entire available size on the drive. Hit apply. Again, it's going to create that additional system reserve partition, and then we hit next to start installing. You'll have a couple reboots during the installation process. Everything should happen automatically. It will come back to this installation screen. After installation is complete, you'll have the final boot into Windows 7. We just had our last restart, and it's going to go through a couple more setup things now that the operating system is loaded. It will automatically check video performance, and it will load a bunch of default Windows 7 drivers. So here we can see Windows 7 Home Premium. Here you get to type in your username. You can choose one, whatever your name might be, or a unique name if you want. And it will also give your computer a name, and then you can just hit next. I'm going to go for Newegg TV 2500K. Next up, you want a password. Definitely choose a password. This will help keep your computer safe. Don't use a simple default password. You don't need this one to be too complex, but it will definitely give an added layer of protection. Next, it will prompt you for your Windows product key. This should be the key on the inside of your retail box copy of Windows 7. Just open up the box, the key will be inside, and we're not going to show you this part. Windows 7 has some automatic protection features, and I recommend to use the recommended settings. Finally, we're going to set up our system date and time. It should be able to read this off of your motherboard's BIOS clock, but if it's not accurate, then you'll definitely want to update that just to make sure you have the time set properly. And there you have it. Windows 7 is now installed and booted up for the first time. We have our basic desktop here, and Windows has loaded a bunch of default drivers for the hardware that we have installed. Next thing we're going to want to do is update all of the drivers for the hardware. Now, if you're not familiar with a driver, it's simply a bit of software that helps the operating system communicate with the hardware as effectively as it can, and that's why you want to get the updated ones to get the best performance possible out of your machine. So that is next, installing drivers and configuring Windows. Since your fresh install of Windows 7 is using default drivers, it will be functional, but it will not be ideally functional yet. You're going to want to get updated drivers from the internet in order to make all of your parts work the way they should. Now, if you're downloading drivers, you might have the question of, well, what parts do I actually need to download drivers for? So I've made a short list here of the 8 essential computer parts that we've installed, that you saw in part 2. And fortunately, all these ones with the red X here do not need drivers. Case doesn't need one, neither does power supply, CPU, memory, or your storage, your hard drives, or your SSDs. And your optical drive doesn't need one either. In order to play back Blu-rays or DVDs, you will need some software for your optical drive, but we'll come back to that after the drivers are set up. What you will need drivers for is your motherboard, and there's a few different parts of the motherboard that need individual drivers. The chipset on the motherboard is very important, and we're going to do that one first. Also, you have a built-in network interface card, that Ethernet port on the back of your motherboard, that will need a driver. It's also sometimes just called a NIC, network interface card, or LAN. Also, you will need drivers for your USB ports, specifically the USB 3 ports. USB 2 should work by default, but you will want to get the proper drivers to make sure it's functioning as efficiently as possible. And finally, you will need drivers for the audio card that's built into your motherboard to make sure that you can make use of all of the surround sound and everything that your audio card has to offer. Finally, you will need drivers for your video card, but we can save that one for last because the video card drivers tend to be a bit of a more sizable download, and we'll do that after all the motherboard drivers are installed. So what you're going to want to do is mark down your motherboard model number and your video card model number, and then you also want to keep in mind what version of Windows you have installed. So Windows 7 64-bit is what we're using today. Once you've got that stuff in hand, you will want to download the drivers. Now, I'm going to show you guys 2 different ways to do this. First off is if you have a computer that's working already, that's set up, that has drivers, that has antivirus software installed, that's going to be the safest way to do it. You're just going to want to download the drivers on that computer, copy them to a thumb drive like this, or possibly burn them to a DVD or CD, and then you can put them on your computer. So I'm going to do that with our build B over here, and then with our build A. And then with build B here, I'm going to show you guys how to do it if you don't have another computer to use, but you do have internet. So for our build A, we have an ASUS motherboard, so we can head over to the ASUS website. We're going to go to Services, and we're going to go to Support, which is usually where you can download drivers. And we're going to go to Downloads and ASUS drivers. From there, we can choose our motherboard model number, and then we can either as a whole or individually download each individual driver for the chipset, network interface card, USB, and audio. For our build B, we have a Gigabyte motherboard, so we will go to the Gigabyte website. We will go to Support and Downloads. Same type of thing. We're going to input, there's various ways you can search for the motherboard that you have installed, and then you can download that group of drivers from there. Now for your video card, you might have an AMD-based video card, or you might have an NVIDIA-based video card. So you can download those directly from AMD. Just head over to the Support and Drivers section, or you can download those straight from NVIDIA, and they always make the drivers nice and easily accessible because lots of people go to the site for that. Another option would be to go to the manufacturer of your respective video card. So for instance, here on the Gigabyte site, we could download the Gigabyte version of the drivers for our AMD-based video card, the 6850 that we have installed in this system. Similarly, we could go over to the MSI website to download the video card drivers for the video card that we have in build A. That's really up to you. If you have a specialty video card that has some additional features, you might want to go directly to the manufacturer's website, but generally for the latest and most effective drivers possible, you want to go to the AMD or the NVIDIA website. So now that I have downloaded my set of drivers, I've created a folder for them, properly labeled, so I can get back to it in the future. I'm going to copy that over to my USB drive. It's going to take just a few minutes to drop those all into there, and then I can transfer them over to the new computer. My drivers are copied to my USB key, so I'm just going to plug this in here. Make sure I plug it in at the right angle, of course. It should pop up right here since I'm plugging it into a USB 2.0 port. We will continue without scanning. We're going to open folder to view files. I've put these in a folder called motherboard drivers, and there they are. So audio, chipset, LAN, and USB. And I'm going to start with the chipset. The order I'm going to install these in is chipset first, then the LAN, then the USB and audio drivers. Finally, we will download the video drivers straight from the site, and from that point, we should be good to go. Each time you start one of these install programs up, it will give you a prompt. Just hit OK. It will proceed with installation. So this is the installation for our Intel P67 chipset. We click yes and next, and there it goes, installing the drivers. Now bear in mind, guys, as you're installing these drivers, I have just picked the bare minimum drivers that you will want to install. This motherboard here does have some additional hardware such as a RAID controller, and you will want to get the drivers for those things as well. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm just keeping with the bare minimum stuff that everyone will need, and you will also be prompted for restarts throughout the process. After the chipset, you'll definitely want to restart. After the rest of them, you can hit cancel and wait to restart until you load those individual drivers. After the system restarts, we will load the rest of the drivers, and then we will be good to go. Please note that at this point, I have not plugged in our Ethernet yet. We will want to wait to do that till these drivers are installed just to be safe, and then from there we'll move on to installing Windows updates, getting an antivirus program. If you guys remember, this computer here has two hard drives. We have a solid-state drive and this mechanical hard drive that we're using for storage, which I unplugged when I started to install Windows. So now is a good time to plug that back in. All I did was unplug the data cable from it. That way we can start backing up some of the stuff, like all the drivers that we downloaded, onto that drive and have them saved for future, anytime we might need them in the future. Now, one other quick thing to mention, now that I've plugged that back in, is if you guys remember when I set up the BIOS, or the EFI in this case, it has a boot priority, so it's going to go to your hard drives, and there's a chance now that I've plugged that back in, it might try to go and boot off of that drive. If that is the case, then you get an error that says no operating system detected. You just want to jump back into the BIOS and rearrange that boot priority to set your boot drive, which in this case is the SSD, to boot off of first. So now we've installed all of the drivers except for the video card, which is why the resolution is still a little bit low here. But now it's time to plug in our Ethernet. And with our LAN driver installed, we should get an internet connection. If you are working with a typical home setup, you want to route that over to your router. Routers are good to have because, hey, there it is. Routers actually have a built-in firewall, and that will keep you a little bit more protected. We're going to just choose home network for here because we're at a home network. It will automatically set up that home network and your internet connection, and then you can have a connection to the internet. Now, you might be tempted at this point to jump onto Facebook or start going around and doing things with your computer, but please, please, please wait. You don't want to surf the internet at this point because you don't have an antivirus installed, and you actually also have not downloaded all the very important Windows updates. Those are important. And now also with Windows 7, it will start to set you up with a home group, and that's if you have multiple computers, you can share stuff in between them. And we're going to cancel this for now just because that's a little bit more advanced, but it's actually really easy to set up with Windows 7. So now we have an internet connection, internet access. We can pull up Internet Explorer, and this will go to Microsoft. There it is, and it will take us through all this stuff. Let's get back to that later. All right, so now at this point, I'm going to download our video card drivers, and we have an MSI NVIDIA GTX 570, so I'm going over to the NVIDIA site, like I showed you on the other computer. Again, right now, no video drivers installed, so everything's going to look kind of big and clunky, but we're in the United States, so let's choose that. And I'm just going to start the download of the driver for our video card. Once that's installed, we can do Windows updates and the virus as mentioned. Antivirus, I should say, not virus. We have a 500 series, we have a GTX 570, we're using Windows 7 64-bit. Here's our driver, let's download it, let's agree, let's save to the desktop, and Windows is already telling me that it's detected Windows updates. It's going to start downloading those in the background. Now this is going to take a little bit of time, so let's leave this for now. And let's go back over to our other computer, which I haven't really started working with yet. So here's a situation where let's pretend you don't have an additional computer to work with. All you have is this computer that you've just built, and you need to connect to the internet to install the drivers. Now, for those of you who maybe don't have an internet connection at all, I have no idea how you're watching this video right now, but for that case, you will just want to take your driver disk that came with the motherboard, install all the drivers off of that, take the driver disk that came with your video card, install the drivers from that, and you'll be good to go. But again, you really want to get the latest and greatest drivers. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to load just the LAN drivers for the network interface card off of this disk. Then I'm going to connect to the internet, and I'm going to download the latest drivers for the motherboard and the video card from that. I'm going to install in the same order, except that I'm going to do the LAN first off of this so I can get that internet connection. Now, I did a quick test here by plugging in the Ethernet to this computer, and we don't have an internet connection. Sometimes after loading Windows 7, it will have a default driver available for your network card, but in case it doesn't, definitely keep this disk handy so you can pop it in, and in just a few seconds we'll be able to access that disk. I'm going to pull up just the LAN driver, install that, and then we can get an internet connection to download the rest of the drivers. So here's my network folder, and wow, this disk actually has quite a few different drivers. So I'm just going to check the motherboard manual. I'm going to look at LAN. I see it's a Realtek RTL8111E chip. So there's the RTL8111. We want Windows 7, and we can just go to Setup, and this should load our drivers. And as soon as my LAN driver finished installing, we immediately got a pop-up because it detected the internet connection. So once again, I'm going to set up for a home network here. It will do the same thing as on the other computer. It will prompt me to set up the basic network and everything. I'm just going to skip through this, and then I will head over to Internet Explorer, and I will start downloading the drivers, first for the chipset, then for the USB and audio, and then finally for our video card. Our video card driver has finished installing, so we are going to, finished downloading, so we're going to install that, and we're finally going to be able to up the resolution as well as get rid of this extra black frame around the screen here. Again, that is just like that because we're plugging in via HDMI. There's an automatic underscan that goes on because it's assuming when you're plugging into HDMI that there's a good chance you're plugging into a high definition television. I always like to do custom installations just so I can see everything exactly that's being installed. And clean installation, even though this is a fresh install Windows, is always the best bet. So this will just take a few minutes to install the graphics driver. We'll see the screen go blank a couple times, and then it will look much nicer, and we'll be able to go into the NVIDIA control panel and adjust a few settings. There we go. It's automatically detected our default video resolution for this monitor, and we can now make use of all of our screen real estate. It even automatically fixed that overscan issue we were seeing, so very smart drivers from NVIDIA. Next up is going to be Windows updates, and that is very important to get all the Windows updates that are available before you do much with the computer. So if you want to prompt the Windows to do that automatically, you can just type up or update in here and go to Windows Update, and it will start the Windows Update process. Windows Update is going to have quite a few things to install because everything that has come out between when that disk was printed that you installed Windows off of and now, it's going to want to update. So you want to go through that process, it'll restart, go back to Windows Update, download it again, restart. Basically keep doing that until it tells you that there are no more updates left to install. Right now there are 80 important updates available. So back over here to our System B, and we have the driver, the chipset, we have the USB, and we have the audio drivers all downloaded. So I'm just going to start installing these in order, and we should be good to go in just a few minutes. So just like with build A, I've taken all of my drivers that I downloaded, I've labeled them in folders with the installs, and I'm going to put them all in this folder here to keep as a backup just in case for later on. Next up is the video card drivers, and just like with our first build, well actually I should say different from our first build, we have an AMD based video card here. So I'm going to go to the AMD website, and I'm going to download the video card driver for our video card, and from there once again we should have a much nicer looking display, and we'll be all set to install Windows updates. Now since we are connected to the internet right now, Windows updates are already starting to download in the background. That's okay, they can be downloading at the same time. It'll save you a little bit of time downloading them in the future. But for now, here, let's go to support and drivers. AMD's driver software package is called Catalyst, and there's a Catalyst Control Center in there. That is a carryover from ATI, which was, actually still says ATI for some of these things. And you can download this whole suite as a package, or if you just want the bare minimum drivers, you can download those individually. For today, we're going to download the entire suite, and we'll install that as one big item all at the same time. All right, now Windows Update has finished downloading and installing the first pack of updates, and it's actually continuing to go, but I'm going to show you guys a couple other things first. We will want to make sure that we have everything all set with this computer. So I'm going to go to Properties by right-clicking on my computer, and then I'm going to do a few things in here. First, I'm going to go to Device Manager, and this will tell me all the devices that are installed. Now I can look over here and I can actually see there's a few other items here with the little exclamation points that I still might need drivers for. So that's a good thing to monitor. Just double check your motherboard manual, see if there's anything else driver-wise that you need to install from the manufacturer's website. Another thing I want to do though is check the disk drive. If you remember, I just plugged that back in, and actually if I look at computer here, I can see my operating system drive, but I'm not seeing that other hard drive. Reason for that is that hard drive is brand new. It has not been initialized or formatted at all. So what I'm going to do is go over here to disk drives first, and I can see my Western Digital 1.5 terabyte Caviar Black is there and being detected, but we need to initialize it. So I'm going to right click on my computer, and I've added that to the desktop, but you can do it from the start menu as well. We're going to go to Manage, and it's going to pop up Computer Management. If you have new drives installed, you want to click on Storage Disk Management right there. It's going to take a second to load up, and right away it tells us, hey, you have a new hard drive installed that has not been initialized yet. If you are using a 3 terabyte hard drive, you probably want to use GPT. Since it's less than 2 terabytes, we're just going to go with MBR, which will work just fine for us. Now the drive will initialized, and we can see it down here, disk 1, unallocated space. You remember partitioning the drive that we did when we first installed Windows? That's what we need to do with this. So we can right click here, create a new simple volume, and it will just guide us through the process. We want to use the maximum amount of space. Unless you want to partition, that's another option you can do from here. And we will assign it a drive letter, and then we're going to format it. NTFS is the default you want to use for Windows 7. Allocation unit size you can leave to default. We want to do a quick format because it's a brand new drive. If you're reusing an old drive, it's best to not do the quick format. It will take a while, especially if it's a big drive, but that will make sure that you get a nice clean format. And since we want to know what it is, I'm going to label this WD Caviar Black 1.5 terabyte. And now we'll hit Next and Finish. It's going to start formatting. It'll tell you a progress down here. It shouldn't take too long since we did a quick format. Once that's done, hey, it's done. It's done, and now we can see our Caviar Black right there, formatted capacity. And now we can start copying stuff to it if we want to back up. The reason I set that up is because one more thing I'm going to show you guys, and that is the Windows, actually 2 things I'm going to show you guys. I shouldn't get too far ahead of myself. Oh, there's the autoplay that popped up when it finished formatting. All right, so two more things I'm going to show you guys. The first is Antivirus, and you definitely want an antivirus software. There's lots of them available out there. One I'm going to recommend right now just because it's free, quick, and easy to use, and it integrates really well with Windows is Microsoft Security Essentials. It's a really basic antivirus software. It's pretty low impact, and it runs in the background. You can download it for free, and you just click this little button here, and it's going to take you through to run the file and all that good stuff. So we'll install that so we have an antivirus installed. And then finally, after that, we might want to install some programs. If you have programs that you frequently use, so maybe you have an Office suite, or maybe you have some editing software you use, and as long as you're installing your programs right now, you might as well pop in your Optical Drive software. Here we have CyberLink BD Solutions, which is pretty much Optical Drive playback software. It allows you to play back Blu-ray discs and DVDs. Remember, Windows cannot play back Blu-rays and DVDs by default. You will need software in order to enable that. So anything that you use really often, we're going to want to install that right away. And then the last thing that we're going to do is we're going to make a backup image. We have our drivers installed. We've done all of our Windows updates. We have a basic antivirus software installed, and we've installed all of the programs that we want to have and use frequently. And what we're going to do last is make a system image. A system image will take a snapshot of this Windows installation just as it is, so that if anything happens in the future, we can go back, restore that to the SSD, and we'll have everything pristine just like it is right now. So I'm going to go here to the Windows search bar, and I'm going to type backup, and that will give us the backup and restore function. You can also access that through the control panel, but I like to use all those shortcuts there. And right here up at the top left, we see create a system image. We're going to click on that. Please bear in mind we need to be logged in as the administrator. And that's going to give us a few different options. It's already chosen our Western Digital Caviar Black because you want to save that image to a different drive than the system drive. You can also back up onto DVDs if you want, or you can back up to the network if you have that option available to you. We're going to hit Next, and that's pretty much all it's going to do. It's going to take the system reserved and our operating system drive, and it's going to back it up onto the Caviar Black. We hit Start Backup. It will save that file onto our additional storage drive, and then anytime in the future we can boot off of the Windows disks and restore that partition just as it is right now. And now we're done. Ta-da! Alright guys, now that the tutorial is complete, I wanted to end this video with a Q&A session. The video part 1 and part 2 have been up for a little bit of time now, and a lot of people have posted questions and comments. So I've taken a selection of questions from those videos, not all of them mind you, but a decent amount, and I'm going to just run through some of them and hopefully answer a few of the questions that you guys had outstanding from the part 1 and part 2 videos. And the first question is, well, here's the example right here. I have a mechanical hard drive, so maybe a 3.5-inch one like this one, and I just recently got a solid state drive. Solid state drive, just like that one, an SSD. Can I copy my operating system from that mechanical hard drive over onto the SSD? The answer is yes, you can, but I would not advise it. Basically, there are several factors that can cause the SSD's performance to degrade if you're copying an operating system install straight onto the SSD using a cloning utility or software along those lines. Now again, there are ways to do it. You can find tutorials online, and there's definitely other ways that you can prevent the slowdown that can occur that can hinder your SSD's performance. But the best way to go about it is to simply take your SSD, do a fresh install of Windows onto it, just like you saw us do in this video. Then you start fresh and clean. That's a good thing to get in the habit of doing anyway, because if you're familiar with having all your data backed up, having all your programs that you use set aside, and you can do a reformat and a reinstall of Windows, it can help keep your computer running in top shape and as fast as it can possibly be. So get familiar with reformatting, reinstalling Windows. It's handy to be able to do, and if you do purchase an SSD, I recommend doing a fresh install onto it, then load your programs, copy your files over, and you should be good to go. Next question, what monitors are you guys using? And these, we actually have several back here. These are Asus monitors that you can see right here, and these over here that we've been using for quite some time are VW266H monitors. Unfortunately, those are end of life. They're 25.5-inch monitors, and actually we are replacing and upgrading with these right here. These are VK278. That is a model number. They are 27-inch monitors. They have a 2.0 megapixel camera built in. They're really nice. We really like them so far. They're also LED backlit. So if you're interested, model number again, VK278, and you can find those on Newegg. There's also a version that doesn't have that camera built in if you're not into that. All right, next question. What about SLI or Crossfire? SLI or Crossfire, we didn't really demo in this. It's a little bit more complicated. Basically, it's using 2 cards, sometimes even 3 cards in tandem. You mount them all to your motherboard. Some quick tips on that. Make sure your motherboard is compatible with SLI or Crossfire from the get-go if you plan to do that. I recommend starting off with SLI or Crossfire. If you buy a video card and you're like, well, maybe I'll get another one of the same video card in 3 months or 6 months or whenever I get to it, you probably won't get to it, and there's probably updated versions available by the time you get around to that. So if you want to do SLI or Crossfire, start off with that from the get-go, or at least upgrade very quickly if you do plan to do that. Now SLI is going to use these little bridges like this. This is a 2-way bridge to connect 2 cards together. This is a 3-way bridge to connect 3 cards together. Those will generally come with your motherboard if it is compatible with that. This is a Crossfire bridge similar to the 2-way SLI bridge. This is for AMD cards. The SLI bridges are for NVIDIA-based cards, and this will generally come with the video card itself. For the motherboard you purchase, again, make sure it's compatible, and for the PCI Express slots, make sure the top one's always going to be X16 compatible, and you want X8 at bare minimum for the additional slot, and 16, 8, and 8 if possible, if you're going to go with 3-way SLI. And hopefully we'll have a tutorial for that soon. Also, one last note, make sure your power supply can handle that much wattage. Video cards use a lot of wattage, and you want to make sure that your power supply can handle it. Let's move right along here. Next question, can you connect a serial ATA 6 gigabit per second to a serial ATA 3 gigabits per second hard drive? Answer here is yes. Serial ATA drives are all backwards compatible. Basically, you're just going to be limited by the throughput of the serial ATA port you're connecting to. So if you have a serial ATA revision 3, that's 6 gigabit per second port, and you plug in, you can have a serial ATA revision 1, revision 2, or revision 3 drive plugged into that port. Same way, you can take a serial ATA revision 3 drive and plug it into a serial ATA revision 1 port. Just bear in mind, if you have, for instance, a serial ATA revision 3 SSD like this, it actually does have the capability to saturate that much bandwidth, and you plug it into a serial ATA revision 1 port, it will work, but you're going to be capping the speed of this drive. So if you get an SSD, make sure you're using serial ATA revision 2 or ideally serial ATA revision 3. Next off, how do you turn off the external build? In video number 2, you guys saw me do a build outside the box. A couple different ways to do that. If you don't have a hard drive and an operating system connected to the computer and you're just going through the BIOS utilities, you can pretty much just turn off the system anytime you want. You can do it by shorting the 2 pins like I showed you guys, or if you have the case connected, you can just hit the power button. If it doesn't work, you can just turn off the power supply. If you do have a operating system drive attached, it's best not to just turn it off. If your operating system drive is attached, you can push the power button. If it doesn't turn off, you can hold down the power button for 5 to 10 seconds and it will power down. But only do that if your system's completely locked up and you can't get it to turn off anyway. Last resort would be to switch off the power supply or unplug it from the wall, but really the pushing and holding in the power button will almost always turn your system off if it is severely locked up. Let's see, next up, where can I get that USB 3.0 front panel adapter? I kind of teased you guys with this. We're not selling these right now. We're hoping to have them soon. This is actually an accessory that comes with a Roseville case that we sell. It's just a pass-through, so if you have one of these cases from the last year or so that has the pass-throughs for the back for USB 3, it gives you a motherboard adapter. Now, if you can't find one of these, and you might even want to consider getting one that goes from one motherboard plug to 2 USB adapters, you might have gotten something like this with your motherboard. And this basically is just a bracket that you can put on the back of your case in the PCI Express bays, and then you can route that and plug it into your motherboard. Now, one thing you can do with these is actually just unbolt these 3 screws right there, take off that little panel, and this will work just the same. You can plug in your front panel USB ports there and then plug that into your motherboard. You will have to find a place in your case to tie that down or just let it hang in there, however you want to do it, but that will work just the same way. All right, next question. Can changing power supplies affect performance? This is from the first video when I was talking about the things that don't really affect performance, and I said the case and the power supply are a couple of those things. Generally speaking, no. If you're going from a similar wattage power supply to a similar wattage power supply and you're already set with both of those, it's not going to affect the performance of your computer at all. Now, one situation in which it can is if you're overclocking. It's going to use more wattage from the power supply, and basically you want to give yourself more headroom for that. So if you do, say, go from a higher wattage power supply and drop it down a little bit, and you've overclocked and you don't have that amount of power going to the VRMs on the motherboard, then you could have your performance suffer a little bit. So yes, in some cases it can, but generally speaking, using similar power supplies, it will not. Next up, you did the thermal paste wrong. And no matter what, anytime I've done thermal paste in any video, there's always people that tell me I do it wrong. So I'm going to give you guys some advice here. To go straight to the horse's mouth, so to speak. Arctic Silver is one of the top-notch thermal paste producers, and if you go to arcticsilver.com, they have an instructions tab, and they will give you very specific instructions for how to apply thermal paste, not just based on the thermal paste itself, but also based on the CPU you're using. The CPU has a heat spreader on top. You actually can't see the CPU die because it's got that piece of metal on top, and the die might be located at different places on there. So that will give you very detailed instructions for, depending on your CPU, where to put it on, depending on the consistency of the thermal paste, how to apply it. There's the dot in the middle and let the heat spreader spread it method. There's the spread it around method that you saw me do, which you want to be very careful, again, not to have air bubbles. But that will give you some pretty clear instructions. And I did bring along one other type of thermal paste here just to show you guys, because this one is hard to get wrong because this is kind of like nail polish, but basically you have a little brush there and you can just brush it right onto the top of your heat spreader on your CPU and get nice even coverage. And this is it's kind of thinner thermal material, but that's something to consider if you're really concerned about how to apply thermal paste. And hopefully that will put the thermal paste question to rest, but feel free to disagree. All right, next up, how come you don't need a sound or audio card? Those used to be pretty standard in a lot of computers, and basically most motherboards now come with an audio chip built in. They have the audio ports on the back. You can just use that integrated audio, and for most situations, it is perfectly fine. There are add-on sound cards available, and if you're an audiophile, if you really like high-definition music, or you really want to have gold-plated connectors, or just get the top quality audio, you can get an add-on sound card. It's a great investment. They usually slot into the PCI slots, PCI Express slots on the motherboard, and that will give you a lot more options for your sound. One other thing I wanted to mention about sound in general, and actually if you're using Windows 7, it's very good at handling multiple sound devices. If you have a video card like this one that has an HDMI port, there's actually another sound chip that's on this board. You can't see it; it's under the the cooling device here. But if you have an HDMI plug on your video card, there's actually an additional sound device on there, and you can choose whether to use the one on the video card, or you can use one on your motherboard. Just gives you a few more options, a few more audio outputs to use for your computer. So that's the sound question. Moving right along, where is part 2? Where is part 2? Give me part 2. There was kind of a gap between part 1 and part 2. Just my personal apologies to anyone who was really expecting that. I did get sick at the time, and we had to delay it, and we had some other stuff we had to do in between. But it's up now. Part 3 is up now, and I hope you guys really like it all. We've put a lot of work into it. Tried to be as thorough as possible, so these videos will help as many of you as possible out there. Next question: do I need extra cables? A lot of people buy all this stuff, and they're worried that they won't be able to plug one thing into the other, and that's a legitimate concern. But given the builds that I've shown you guys, all of the cables that you've seen, with the exception of one little Molex to serial ATA adapter that I used in this build right here, all of the cables were included. So you generally don't have to worry about that. An exception might be if you have a specialized case and it's spread out and you need maybe an extension cable to reach from one point to another. That's a good reason to research your case to make sure that your hardware setup is going to be in a situation where you can have all your cables reached to all the points. Sometimes you do need to get extensions, but again, that's kind of on a case-by-case basis. But bear that in mind, and also helps to get a power supply with extra long cables if you're concerned about that. One exception here: there are parts on the market that are called OEM, and that is Original Equipment Manufacturer. I don't know why that is the term, but basically if you get an OEM part, that means it's just going to come with the bare drive. If you buy an OEM hard drive like this one, you're going to get just the drive by itself. If you buy an OEM optical drive, actually the optical drive in this case here was OEM. That did not come with, for instance, a serial ATA cable. If you're buying OEM parts, those are made for manufacturers. They are available to consumers, but just bear in mind that you're not going to get any accessories or special stuff with them. Also, sometimes the warranties on OEM parts are less than they are with retail parts. So you can save some money by going that route, but make sure if you're getting OEM, or if it's listed as a bare drive or anything, any language along those lines, make sure that you bear in mind that you're not going to get accessories. And in those cases, you might need extra stuff. OEM CPUs are also available, and those don't come with a heatsink fan. So just to bear in mind, if you're getting OEM, you might need to get some cables or heatsink fans, accessories, stuff like that. Next up, can you add a better video card to a motherboard with integrated video? Answer here in most cases is yes. If the motherboard has a PCI Express slot that is at least 16 or 8 speed, then yes, you can add a discrete video card to a motherboard with integrated video. The other thing is that these Sandy Bridge parts that we've been using here, the processors themselves have an integrated GPU. Now these are both P67 chipset motherboards, which means that you cannot actually make use of that GPU. But some motherboards that you're using, Sandy Bridge parts, AMD and Intel both have CPUs available now that have integrated GPUs, and that just gives you a little bit more flexibility to use the integrated GPU if you have the right chipset motherboard, or you can also add on a discrete video card if you so desire after the fact. So for people who maybe want to build a basic system right now, use integrated video, and then upgrade in the future, that gives you a nice upgrade path. All right, some people were confused by the difference between bit and byte. That goes back to the very beginning of the first video where I talked about on, off, and zeros and ones. Again, a bit is a 0 and 1. It's just a single bit of information. You collect those into 8 groups of 8, and that makes a byte. Now the letter definition for bit is a little b, and the letter definition for byte is a big B. So for instance, when we're talking about serial ATA, we have serial ATA revision 3, which is 6 gigabits per second. And then when we're talking about actually measuring it, so getting back to this SSD can do 300 or 400 megabytes per second. So that's a bit of a difference there, but megabyte, gigabyte, megabit, gigabit. Just make sure if you're looking at numbers, if you're making comparisons, if you see the little b, that's bit, and if you see the big B, that's 8 times the amount of bits, and that's bytes. Next, is it okay to use a magnetized screwdriver? Short answer is yes. Most components that are sensitive to magnets inside the computer are shielded. Magnetic screwdrivers have a very, very minimal amount of magnetization to them, and it does make it handy if you drop little screws or whatever to pick them up with the tip of the magnetized screwdriver. So handy to have those on hand. Don't put any larger size magnets or unshielded speakers or anything like that near your computers because they are not quite that capable of resisting magnets. But screwdriver tips, yes, that's okay, and you shouldn't worry about it. And that wraps it up for our questions. That wraps it up for our video. That wraps it up for part 1, part 2, and part 3 of our How to Build a Computer series. I hope you guys have learned a lot and enjoyed me talking at length about computers and computer building and software and all the other fantastic things. Feel free to post comments in the videos. Feel free to visit Newegg.com to search for all of the computer parts we have available. Feel free to head over to our community forums, eggexpert.com, if you're interested in talking to our community, asking questions and answers, and getting a little bit more information on parts and feedback from our community members. If you enjoyed today's video or any of this series of videos, please subscribe to our Newegg TV YouTube channel. Once again, my name is Paul. Thank you very much for watching this video, as well as all of our other videos on our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time, everyone.